At 0900 hours on June 4, 1942, Lieutenant Commander James Harrigan sat in the cramped cockpit of his F-4F Wildcat and watched the Pacific Ocean slide beneath him like a sheet of hammered steel. 3,000 feet below, the water was dark, endless, unforgiving. Harrigan was 37 years old. He wore wire-rimmed glasses that fogged in the humid cockpit air. His face was lean, weathered, marked by too many sleepless nights and too much bad coffee. He looked more like a high school mathematics teacher than a fighter pilot. And maybe that's exactly what he was. He adjusted his oxygen mask and scanned the horizon. To his left and right, two other Wildcats held formation. Young men, 22, 28. Boys, really. Boys who called him Skipper to his face and Grandpa behind his back. Ensign Fletcher flew the left-wing position. They called him Fletch. Harrigan could see the kid's white knuckles gripping the stick even from here. Lieutenant Bishop held the right, older, steadier, but still young enough to believe he was immortal. 3 planes, 3 fat, barrel-shaped Wildcats against the entire Japanese Navy. Harrigan checked his watch. In 30 minutes, maybe less, he would know if 6 months of obsessive calculation had been genius or madness. He would know if the kitchen table theory he'd built from wooden matchsticks could survive contact with reality. He would know if an old man with bad eyesight and 0 aerial kills could teach death itself to dance. The intelligence brief had been clear. 50 zeros, maybe more. Guarding 4 aircraft carriers, the finest fighter pilots in the world, flying the most agile killing machines ever built. And Harrigan had 3 Wildcats, 3 sledgehammers trying to fight 50 scalpels. The math was simple, the math was brutal, but Harrigan had spent his entire life trusting math. And the math said there was a way, a narrow way, a way that required perfect timing and absolute trust and a willingness to fly straight into the teeth of death without flinching. The math said the weave would work. It had to work, because if it didn't, a lot of good men were about to die. Harrigan's hands rested light on the control stick. The Wildcat vibrated around him, engine thrumming with mechanical indifference. The plane didn't care who was flying it, didn't care about odds or tactics or the fact that its pilot had never shot down an enemy aircraft in his life. The Wildcat was just a machine, and machines followed the laws of physics. Harrigan believed in physics more than he believed in luck. He looked down at his gloved hands. They were steady. That surprised him. He'd expected them to shake. In the breast pocket of his flight suit, folded tight against his chest, was a letter he'd written to his wife Anne 3 nights ago. He hadn't mailed it, didn't plan to. It was insurance, something for her to find if he didn't come back. The letter said things he'd never been good at saying out loud. It said he loved her. It said he was sorry for all the nights he'd stayed up late with his matchsticks instead of coming to bed. It said he hoped she'd understand that some problems demanded solving, even if solving them meant risking everything, especially if solving them meant saving lives. Harrigan forced himself to breathe slow and deep. He scanned the sky ahead. Nothing yet, just blue and endless emptiness. But the emptiness wouldn't last. Soon the sky would be full of sharks. 3 months earlier, Harrigan had stood in a cemetery in San Diego and watched them lower Lieutenant Devon Ashford into the ground. The day was bright, painfully bright, California sunshine that turned everything sharp and cruel. 21 men stood at attention in their dress whites. The honor guard fired 3 volleys that cracked across the hills like breaking bones. The bugler played taps, each note falling into the silence like a stone into deep water. Devon Ashford had been 25 years old. He'd been Harrigan's student, then his wingman, then his friend. Now he was a folded flag in his widow's hands. She was 7 months pregnant. Her name was Margaret. She stood dry-eyed and rigid as they handed her the triangle of fabric. She held it against her swollen belly and stared at the casket like she was trying to will it open through sheer force of rage. After the ceremony, after the others had filed away to their cars, Harrigan approached her. He didn't know what to say. There were no words that mattered, nothing that could undo what had happened. Margaret looked up at him. Her eyes were red but hard. "They told me he died a hero," she said. Her voice was flat, empty. "They said he engaged the enemy with courage and determination." Harrigan said nothing. "But you know what really happened, don't you, Commander?" Harrigan met her gaze. He owed her that much. "He tried to turn with a zero," Harrigan said quietly. "The zero turned tighter, got on his tail. Devon never had a chance." Margaret nodded, like she'd known, like she'd been waiting for someone to confirm it. "He died because they gave him a death trap," she said. "They gave him a plane that can't fight and told him to be brave, and now he's dead and I'm alone, and this baby will never know its father." She pressed the flag harder against her stomach. "They'll give me a pension," she continued. "They'll tell me he's sacrificed for his country. They'll tell me to be proud." She looked directly into Harrigan's eyes. "But he didn't sacrifice, Commander. He was murdered. Murdered by arrogance and stupidity and machines that don't work." Harrigan felt something crack open inside his chest. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was inadequate, pathetic, but it was all he had." Margaret turned away, started walking toward the line of black cars. Then she stopped. "Find a way," she said without looking back. "Find a way so the next widow doesn't have to stand here holding a flag." Harrigan stood alone at the grave after she left. He looked down at the fresh earth, at the temporary marker with Devon's name and dates that proved how little time he'd been given. "I'll find a way," Harrigan said to the dead man. "I promise." It was a promise he didn't know how to keep, not yet. But he would find out. The problem was simple to state and impossible to solve. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat was a flying tank. Heavy, armored, built to take punishment and keep flying. American engineering at its most pragmatic. It could absorb damage that would shred other fighters into confetti, but in a dogfight, durability was a consolation prize for the man getting shot. The Wildcat was slow. It climbed like a refrigerator with wings. When you tried to turn it hard, the whole aircraft groaned and shuddered and fought you every inch of the way. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0 was the exact opposite. Light, fast, agile. Built from aluminum alloys that were stronger and lighter than anything the Americans had. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, just a razor-sharp airframe wrapped around a pilot and two 20mm cannons. The Zero could turn on a dime and leave you 9 cents change. It could climb almost vertically. It could dance around a Wildcat like a ballerina around a sumo wrestler. In the first 6 months of the war, Zeros had slaughtered Allied pilots across the Pacific. They'd destroyed entire squadrons, turned the sky into a graveyard. The Navy's official tactical doctrine was simple. Never dogfight a Zero. Dive, run, use your weight to escape. Take a shot if you can, but never, ever try to turn with them. It was a doctrine of survival, not victory. It told pilots their only hope was to run away. And men like Devon Ashford, men with courage that outweighed their fear, men who couldn't stand the thought of running, died because of it. Harrigan knew the doctrine was right from a physics standpoint. A Wildcat couldn't turn with a Zero. That was just mathematics. Thrust-to-weight ratios, wing loading, turn radius. In a one-on-one fight, the Zero won, always. But Harrigan had spent the last 3 months asking himself a different question. What if the fight wasn't one-on-one? It was April of 1942, 2 in the morning. Harrigan sat at his kitchen table in the small house he and Anne rented 3 blocks from the base. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across the worn tablecloth. Anne was asleep upstairs, or she was supposed to be. Harrigan had a box of wooden matchsticks spread across the table in front of him. He'd been arranging them for hours, moving them, pushing them across the cloth in patterns that represented fighters and angles of attack, and the terrible geometry of men trying to kill each other at 300 miles per hour. One matchstick was a Wildcat. Another matchstick was a Zero. He moved them through the scenarios that had killed his students, his friends. If the Wildcat turns left, the Zero turns tighter, gets on his tail, dead. If the Wildcat climbs, the Zero climbs faster, shoots him from below, dead. If the Wildcat dives, the Zero follows him down, chops him to pieces, dead. Every scenario ended the same way. The American plane burning into the ocean. Harrigan pushed the matchsticks across the table again and again, looking for something he'd missed, some angle, some trick of physics that could change the outcome. There had to be something. There had to be. He heard footsteps on the stairs, soft, familiar. Anne appeared in the kitchen doorway. She wore her blue nightgown and had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. Her dark hair was loose around her face. She looked tired, worried. She'd been looking worried for weeks now. "James," she said quietly, "it's 2 a.m. I know. You need to sleep." "I can't." Anne crossed to the table. "Anne," she looked down at the scattered matchsticks, at the diagrams he'd drawn on scratch paper, at the coffee cup he'd refilled 4 times. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. "Tell me," she said. Harrigan looked at his wife. Anne had been a mathematics teacher before the war. She understood equations, logic, the clean beauty of problems that had definite solutions. "I keep running the scenarios," Harrigan said. 1 Wildcat against 1 Zero, and we lose every time. The math is against us. The Zero is just a better athlete." He moved the matchsticks again. "But what if," he said slowly, "the problem isn't the plane? What if the problem is the assumption?" "What assumption?" "That it has to be 1-on-1. Harrigan placed 2 matchsticks side by side, 2 Wildcats flying parallel. "What if 2 planes fly together, not in trail formation, not with the wingman behind, but side by side, spread out?" He moved a 3rd matchstick toward them, the Zero, attacking. The Zero comes in, fast, aggressive. He picks the leader, locks onto him. Harrigan moved the Zero matchstick toward the first Wildcat. In a normal fight, the leader would try to turn away. But what if he doesn't? What if when the Zero attacks, the leader turns toward his wingman? He pushed the first Wildcat matchstick to the right. And what if the wingman turns toward the leader? He pushed the second Wildcat to the left. The 2 matches crossed paths in the middle of the table. "They scissor through the sky," Harrigan said. His voice was getting faster, more intense. "And the Zero, chasing the leader, gets dragged right across the wingman's nose. Perfect broadside shot. The hunter becomes the hunted." He looked up at Anne. Her eyes were sharp, focused. She was seeing it now. "It's a geometric trap," she said. "Yes. You're using the enemy's aggression against him, turning his speed into a liability." "Ne?" "Yes." Anne studied the matchsticks. She reached out and adjusted them slightly, measuring angles with her fingers. "The timing would have to be perfect," she said. "If the leader turns too early, the Zero just breaks off. If he turns too late, he's already dead." "I know. And the pilots would have to trust each other completely. The leader is flying straight at a killer, presenting a broadside target. Every instinct says to run, but he has to trust that his wingman will cross his path at exactly the right moment." "I know." Anne looked at him. "James, this is either brilliant or insane." "I know that too." She was quiet for a long moment. Can you test it? I think so. And if it works? If it works, Harrigan said, we stop losing pilots. We stop sending boys up in coffins and calling it duty. Anne reached across the table and took his hand. Then you have to try, she said. Even if they think you're crazy, even if it scares you, you have to try. Harrigan looked down at the matchsticks arranged on the table. 2 planes crossing in the sky. Simple geometry, simple physics, maybe simple enough to work. I'll call it the beam defense position, he said. Anne smiled, just a little. I think you should call it the weave. Presenting the idea to command was like throwing meat to sharks. Harrigan stood in the briefing room of the San Diego Naval Air Station and laid out his diagrams on the table in front of 4 senior officers. Commander Aldrich Kane sat at the head of the table. He was 52, career Navy, a man who believed the manual was written for a reason and that deviation from the manual was how people died. He looked at Harrigan's diagrams like they were written in crayon. Let me understand this correctly, Harrigan, Kane said. His voice was dry, dismissive. You want to train pilots to turn into an attack instead of away from it? Yes, sir. You want them to fly straight while a 0 shoots at them. For a calculated moment, yes, sir. You want them to trust that another pilot, possibly hundreds of feet away, will cross their path at the exact right second to save them. That's correct, sir. Kane sat back in his chair. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. One of the other officers, a captain named Winters, leaned forward. Harrigan, you're an instructor, a good one, but tactics aren't your specialty. This is too complicated, too risky. In the chaos of combat with adrenaline pumping and bullets flying, pilots revert to instinct, and instinct says run when something is trying to kill you. With respect, sir, instinct is getting our pilots killed. The doctrine is sound, Kane said flatly. Hit and run. Use our altitude advantage. Don't dogfight. It works. It works if you define success as not dying, Harrigan said. It doesn't work if you define success as winning. The room went cold. Kane's jaw tightened. Commander Harrigan, I'm going to give you some advice. Stick to teaching basic flight skills. Leave tactics to the men who've actually seen combat. Before Harrigan could respond, the door opened. Captain Blade Martinez walked in. Martinez was 24 years old and already a legend, 12 confirmed kills. A natural pilot with reflexes like a cat and the arrogance to match. He wore his cap tilted just slightly off regulation. Walked with the swagger of someone who'd never lost a fight. He glanced at the diagrams on the table. What's this? Martinez asked. Kitchen table warfare? Commander Harrigan has proposed a new tactical formation, Kane said. I was just explaining why it won't work. Martinez picked up one of the diagrams, studied it for maybe 5 seconds. Then he laughed. The weave? Seriously? Old man, you want pilots to turn toward each other in the middle of a dogfight? Yes. You know what happens when 2 planes fly at each other? They cross paths. They collide, Grandpa. They turn into a fireball. This isn't a chalkboard exercise. This is real life. Martinez tossed the diagram back on the table. Stick to teaching kids how to land without killing themselves, he said. Leave the fighting to fighters. He walked out. The meeting was over. Kane stood. Harrigan, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but the answer is no. We're not teaching suicide tactics to our pilots. Harrigan gathered his diagrams slowly. Permission to test the formation on my own time, sir. Kane waved a hand dismissively. Do what you want in your spare time, Commander. Just don't come crying to me when you and your volunteers auger into the desert. But there was one man who didn't laugh. Vice Admiral Chester Ford was 62 years old. He'd served in the Navy for 40 years. He'd seen enough combat to fill 3 lifetimes and enough politics to make him cynical about both. He caught Harrigan in the hallway after the meeting. Walk with me, Commander. They walked in silence through the corridors of the base, out into the California sunshine. toward the flight line where mechanics were working on a row of Wildcats. "How many students have you lost, James?" Ford asked quietly. 17, sir." "Nay, 17 boys who trusted you to teach them how to stay alive." "Yes, sir." Ford stopped walking. He turned to face Harrigan. "I read your service record. You've been flying for 8 years. You're one of the best instructors we have, but you've never shot down an enemy aircraft." "No, sir." "Why not?" Harrigan was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm not a fighter pilot, sir. I'm a teacher. I analyze, I calculate, I think too much." "And that bothers you?" "Every day." Ford nodded slowly. "The young ones think they're invincible," he said. "Martinez, the other aces, they fly on instinct and adrenaline. They're fast, aggressive, natural killers." He paused. "But you know what they're not? They're not teachers. They can't explain how they do what they do. It's all feel, all reflex, and you can't teach feel." Ford gestured at the diagrams in Harrigan's hands. "But this is geometry, physics, something that can be taught, repeated, standardized." He looked Harrigan in the eye. "I'm too old to care about ego or politics, James. I care about one thing, bringing boys home alive. If your weave can do that, I want to see it." "Thank you, sir. But here's the reality. Command won't listen to me any more than they'll listen to you. We're the old men, the dinosaurs. They want young lions like Martinez." Ford's expression hardened. "So you're going to have to prove it, not on paper, not in theory, in the air, against the best we have." "No." "How, sir?" "You're going to fight Martinez, you and a wingman against him solo. He'll use zero tactics, speed, aggression, energy fighting, everything the Japanese throw at us." Ford smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "And you're going to beat him, with your matchstick theory, in front of witnesses." Harrigan felt his stomach drop. "Sir, Martinez is an ace. He'll what? Kill you? Then your theory was wrong and we saved lives by not teaching it. Or you'll win." "And then they'll have to listen." Ford put a hand on Harrigan's shoulder. "I'll arrange it for tomorrow morning, 0600, over the desert, low altitude so we can see everything." He turned to walk away, then he stopped. "James, one more thing. If you're going to do this, you need to actually believe it will work, because the moment you doubt, you die. And if you die, a lot of other men will follow you into the grave." Admiral Ford walked away across the tarmac. Harrigan stood holding his diagrams and wondering if he'd just signed his own death warrant. The matchsticks had looked so simple on the kitchen table. In the air, against a killer like Martinez, they might just be kindling. The desert air was cold at 0600 hours. Harrigan stood on the tarmac watching the sun break over the mountains east of San Diego. The light came harsh and horizontal, turning the landscape into sharp angles of golden shadow. 3 Wildcats sat on the flight line, engines cold, waiting. Harrigan had spent the night going over the numbers again, calculating angles, timing, distance, the mathematics of life and death, reduced to diagrams on scratch paper. He hadn't slept. Anne had made him coffee at 4 in the morning. She'd kissed him at the door and told him to trust the geometry, trust himself. He wished he could. Now he stood in his flight suit watching mechanics prep the aircraft and wondering if he was about to prove himself a fool in front of the entire base. Admiral Ford arrived in a staff car. He climbed out slowly, stiff from age and old wounds. Behind him came a small crowd, officers, pilots, mechanics. Word had spread. The old instructor was going to fight Blade Martinez. It was either going to be a lesson or a funeral. Martinez pulled up in a Jeep 20 minutes later. He jumped out wearing his flight suit and that cocky grin that made younger pilots worship him and older officers want to slap it off his face. He walked up to Harrigan. "Morning, Grandpa. Ready to get schooled?" "Ready to fly, Captain," Martinez laughed. I'm going to come at you with everything the Japs throw. High side passes, boom and zoom, slashing attacks. I'm going to show you why the weave is a fantasy. We'll see. Who's your wingman? Ensign Fletcher. Martinez looked over at the young pilot standing near the Wildcats. Fletch was 22, fresh out of flight school, nervous. You're trusting your life to a kid who probably hasn't logged 100 hours? I'm trusting the mathematics. Martinez shook his head. Your funeral, old man. The briefing was simple. Ford stood in front of the assembled crowd and laid out the rules. This is a tactical evaluation exercise. Captain Martinez will fly solo and employ 0 attack patterns. Commander Harrigan and Ensign Fletcher will fly the proposed weave formation. Exercise will continue until one side achieves kill position 3 times or 15 minutes elapsed. Ford looked at Martinez. Captain, you will attack as aggressively as you would in actual combat. No safety margins. Then he looked at Harrigan. Commander, if this goes wrong, you have about 3 seconds to break off before you kill yourself and that ensign, understood? Yes, sir. Then get airborne. Harrigan strapped into his Wildcat and went through the pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision. Fuel, check. Oil pressure, check. Ammunition, training rounds, harmless, but the gun cameras would record every trigger pull, every firing solution. He looked to his right. Fletch sat in his cockpit. The kid's face was pale, scared. Harrigan keyed his radio. Fletcher, listen to me. You remember what we practiced? Yes, sir. Don't think. Don't hesitate. When I call the brake, you turn. Hard. Trust the angle. Trust the distance. Sir, what if I'm too close? You won't be. The geometry doesn't lie. And if it does? Harrigan was quiet for a moment. Then we die together. And at least we tried. Not exactly inspiring, but it was honest. The Wildcats fired up one by one. The big radial engines coughed and roared and settled into that deep mechanical thunder that made the ground shake. Harrigan felt the vibration through his seat, through his bones. This was real now. No more matchsticks, no more theory. Just physics and blood and the sky that didn't care which one of them was right. They took off in sequence. Harrigan first, then Fletcher, then Martinez in trail. The Wildcats clawed into the morning air and turned east toward the desert. Below, the base grew smaller. The crowd of watchers became dots on the tarmac. At 5,000 feet, Harrigan leveled off. He throttled back and let Fletcher form up on his wing, not behind, not in trail, but beside him, separated by 1,000 feet of empty air. "Ready position," Harrigan called. "Line abreast formation. Hold your altitude. Hold your spacing." "Roger, skipper." Martinez climbed above them, 8,000 feet, positioning himself like a 0 would, high, fast, ready to dive. Admiral Ford's voice crackled over the radio from the ground observation post. "Exercise is live. Captain Martinez, you are cleared to engage." Harrigan's hands tightened on the stick. He scanned the sky above, looking for the black dot that would become death falling out of the sun. There. Martinez rolled inverted and dove. The Wildcat came down like a hammer, nose pointed straight at Harrigan. Speed building, 400 miles per hour, maybe more. This was the Zero's preferred attack. The high side pass. Use gravity and speed to build energy. Slash through the formation. Kill with one burst, climb back up and reset. It was devastating. It was also predictable. Harrigan watched Martinez grow larger in his windscreen. Every instinct screamed at him to brake, to turn hard and dive away, to run. But running was how you died. "Steady," Harrigan said over the radio, to Fletcher, to himself. "Let him commit." Martinez was 500 yards out now, 400, 300. Harrigan could see the nose of Martinez's Wildcat, could imagine the gun camera recording this moment. The old man, frozen, too scared to move. 200 yards. If this were real combat, Martinez would be firing now. His guns would be shredding Harrigan's plane into scrap metal. 100 yards. "Now!" Harrigan shouted. "Brake right! Hard!" Harrigan yanked the stick right and kicked the rudder. The Wildcat rolled into a knife-edge turn. G-forces crushed him down into his seat. His vision tunneled. Grayed at the edges, he held the turn. Pulled harder. On the other side of the sky, Fletcher broke left. The two Wildcats turned toward each other, crossing paths, scissoring through the air at a combined closing speed of over 600 miles per hour. Martinez, committed to his dive, tried to follow Harrigan into the turn, but the geometry was already in motion. As Martinez pulled his nose around to track Harrigan, he flew directly across Fletcher's flight path. Perfect broadside. Fletcher didn't even have to turn hard. The enemy just appeared in front of him, flying perpendicular. The biggest possible target. Fletcher squeezed his trigger. The gun camera whirred. On the ground, observers would see the tape later, would see that Fletcher had a perfect kill shot. 3 seconds of sustained fire, dead center mass. Martinez would have been torn apart. Martinez knew it too. He broke off the attack, climbed hard, radioed down to the observers. "They got me. Clean kill." On the ground, there was silence. Then Admiral Ford's voice, dry and satisfied. "Score 1 for the weave. Reset and continue." Martinez tried 4 more times. He came in from different angles, different altitudes. He used every trick he knew. Boom and zoom from above, slashing attacks from the beam, low approaches from below. Every time, the result was the same. Harrigan flew straight, presenting himself as bait, letting Martinez commit to the attack, waiting until the last possible second. Then the break, the cross, the trap. And Fletcher, patient and precise, sliding into firing position every single time. After the 5th pass, Martinez leveled off and flew alongside Harrigan. His voice came over the radio. The cockiness was gone. "Skipper, I can't get a clean shot. Every time I commit, I'm dead." "That's the point, Captain. I don't understand. I'm faster, more experienced. I should be able to outfly you." "You're not fighting me," Harrigan said. "You're fighting mathematics. And mathematics doesn't care about experience." There was a long silence. Then Martinez said quietly, "It works. Jesus Christ, it actually works." They landed 20 minutes later. The crowd was waiting. Harrigan climbed out of his cockpit slowly. His legs were shaking. Adrenaline crash. His flight suit was soaked with sweat despite the cold morning air. Martinez walked across the tarmac. The young captain stopped in front of Harrigan. Then he did something that shocked everyone watching. He saluted, not the casual salute of routine military courtesy, a real salute, sharp, respectful, the kind you give to someone who just taught you something that might save your life. "Sir," Martinez said, "I apologize. I called you an old man. I said you were playing at tactics. I was wrong." He lowered his hand. "That weave is the most lethal thing I've ever seen, and I want to learn it." Admiral Ford walked up. He looked at Harrigan. "Well, Commander, you've proved your point. The question now is, can you teach it to others?" "Yes, sir." "How long would you need?" 2 weeks of intensive training, maybe 3. Ford shook his head. "You don't have 3 weeks. You don't have 2 weeks." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, handed it to Harrigan. "Intelligence report came in this morning. Japanese fleet is moving, 4 carriers heading toward Midway. They'll be in position within 72 hours. Harrigan felt his stomach drop. "Sir, I can't train the entire fleet in 3 days. I'm not asking you to train the fleet. I'm asking you to prove the weave in actual combat, against real zeros, against real Japanese pilots who are trying to kill you. Ford's expression was hard, uncompromising. You'll take 12 Wildcats, escort mission for torpedo bombers. The Japanese will throw everything they have at you. If the weave works, you'll survive. If it doesn't, well... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. You ship out tomorrow at 0600. Get your men ready. Admiral Ford walked away. Harrigan stood holding the intelligence report and feeling the weight of it settle over him like a burial shroud. 3 days. 3 days to turn theory into doctrine. 3 days to teach men to trust each other with their lives. 3 days before the sky over Midway turned into a slaughterhouse. The next 72 hours blurred together into a nightmare of drills and briefings and sleepless nights. Harrigan assembled his squadron, 12 pilots, most of them young, some of them experienced, all of them scared once they understood what they were being asked to do. He drilled them relentlessly. They flew the weave over the California coast, again and again, cross and reset, until their arms ached from fighting the heavy controls, until they could judge the distance and timing by instinct alone. Some of them got it quickly. Natural teachers like Fletcher, who trusted the geometry because the math made sense. Others struggled, fought against every instinct that said don't turn toward danger. Harrigan worked with each man individually, showing them the angles, walking them through the physics, making them understand that the weave only worked if they believed in it absolutely. Doubt would kill them faster than bullets. On the second night, Harrigan sat in the ready room and wrote out the tactical manual. He drew the diagrams, calculated the optimal separation distance, 1,000 feet, close enough to support, far enough to create the crossing angle, the break angle, 45 degrees, the timing. Wait until the enemy is committed. Wait until you can see his eyes. Then break. Trust your wingman. Trust the mathematics. Trust yourself. He finished writing at 3 in the morning. His hand was cramped. His eyes burned. Anne found him slumped over the desk. She didn't say anything, just brought him coffee and sat beside him. "Are you ready?" she asked finally. "No." "Are you going anyway?" "I have to." Anne took his hand. "Come home, James. Please. Just come home." He wanted to promise her he would, but he'd made enough promises to people who were counting on him. He didn't want to make one he might not be able to keep. June 3rd, 1942. The USS Yorktown carved through the Pacific swells, her flight deck rolling with the motion of the sea. Harrigan stood in the ready room and looked at the faces of his pilots. 12 men, 12 Wildcats, 12 chances to prove that an old instructor's kitchen table theory could stand up to the finest fighter pilots in the world. The intelligence officer laid out the mission. Japanese fleet consists of 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, estimated 40 to 50 Zeros on combat air patrol. Your job is to escort VT-3 torpedo squadron, 12 Devastators. They'll go in low and slow to drop their fish. You keep the Zeros off them. The officer looked at Harrigan. "Commander, the Navy is counting on you." Harrigan stood. He looked at his men. "Listen to me. What we're about to do is going to feel wrong. Every fiber of your being is going to scream at you to run when a Zero gets on your tail. You're going to want to dive, to evade, to use speed and altitude to escape." He paused. "Don't. The weave only works if you trust it. If you fly straight, if you let your wingman save you." "Sir," one of the younger pilots said, what if we get separated?" "Then you die. The weave is a team tactic. Solo, we're just targets. Together we're a weapon." Fletcher raised his hand. "Skipper, what about ammunition discipline? If we're firing at crossing targets, we'll burn through rounds fast. Then make every shot count. Aim for the engine, the fuel tanks. The Zero has no armor. One good burst will kill it." Harrigan looked at each man. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but fear is just another variable in the equation. It doesn't change the mathematics. He gestured at the diagrams on the wall. The geometry works. I've proven it. Martinez has confirmed it. Now we prove it to the Japanese. The ready room was silent. Then Martinez stood up. He'd begged to be included in the mission. Ford had approved it. I used to think the old man was crazy, Martinez said. I thought the weave was suicide. Then he made me look like an amateur. Made me realize that all my kills, all my experience, meant nothing against simple physics. He looked at Harrigan. If the skipper says it works, and I'm honored to fly it with you. One by one, the other pilots stood. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. The room understood. They were committed June 4th, 1942, 08:30 hours. The launch was chaos. Wildcats roared down the wooden flight deck, one after another, clawing into the humid Pacific air. But mechanical failures struck like a curse. 3 planes aborted on deck. Hydraulic failures, fuel leaks, engines that refused to start. 2 more turned back shortly after launch. Oil pressure problems, damaged control surfaces. By the time the formation assembled over the carrier, Harrigan counted heads, not 12. 6. 6 Wildcats to escort 12 lumbering devastators against the entire Japanese combat air patrol. The odds had just gone from bad to impossible. All aircraft, this is Yorktown. Be advised, additional mechanical failures among escort force. You are cleared to abort mission if... Harrigan cut off the transmission. Negative, Yorktown. We're proceeding to target. He switched to squadron frequency. Listen up. We're down to 6 birds. That means we fly tighter, smarter, no mistakes. Pair up. Fletcher, you're with me. Martinez and Bishop take the second element. Rains and Kowalski, your element 3. He paused. Execute the weave exactly as trained. Trust your wingman, trust the geometry. We're going to make 6 Wildcats feel like 60. They flew toward the Japanese fleet. The ocean below was endless blue, empty, peaceful. But ahead, on the horizon, Harrigan could see the dark shapes of ships. And above those ships, the sky was full of zeros. 40, the intelligence had said. It looked like more. It looked like the entire Japanese Air Force circling like vultures over a feast they knew was coming. Then the radio crackled. It was Rains. Skipper, I'm losing fuel pressure. Port tank is venting. I can't hold it. Harrigan's jaw tightened. Can you make it back to the carrier? If I turn now, maybe. Then go. Bishop, go with him. Don't fly solo. Roger, skipper. 2 more Wildcats peeled off, heading back toward the Yorktown. Harrigan counted again. 4. 4 Wildcats. No. 3. Because just then, Kowalski's engine started trailing black smoke. I'm hit, Kowalski said. Confusion in his voice. No, wait, not hit. Engine's seizing. I'm losing power. Can you maintain altitude? Negative, I'm going down. Harrigan watched the 4th Wildcat drop toward the ocean. Kowalski would ditch. If he was lucky, he'd survive. If he was very lucky, a destroyer would pick him up before he died of exposure. If. Harrigan was left with Fletcher and Martinez, 3 Wildcats, 3 planes against 50 Zeros to protect 12 helpless devastators. The mathematics had suddenly become very, very ugly. Martinez's voice came over the radio, tight, controlled. Skipper, this is insane. We should call it off. Harrigan looked down at the torpedo bombers flying low and slow beneath them. 12 crews, 36 men, counting on him. Negative, we proceed. Sir, I said we proceed, Captain. Form up, line abreast, 1,000 feet separation. There was silence, then Fletcher's voice, young, scared, but steady. I'm with you, Skipper. And Martinez. Affirmative. Let's show these bastards what 3 old Wildcats can do. Harrigan allowed himself the smallest smile. "We're not old, Captain. We're experienced. There's a difference." The Japanese fleet grew larger on the horizon, and above it, the Zeros began to dive. The sky was about to become a slaughterhouse. But James Harrigan had spent 6 months preparing for this moment. 6 months with matchsticks and diagrams and calculations. 6 months teaching death to dance. Now it was time to see if death had learned the steps. The first Zero came at them like a falling star. Harrigan saw it drop from 15,000 feet, a black speck that grew larger with terrifying speed. Sunlight flashed off its silver wings. The red circle of the rising sun painted on its fuselage looked like a target or a warning. Behind it, a dozen more, then 20. Then the entire sky seemed to fill with them. Harrigan had read the intelligence reports, had studied gun camera footage from earlier battles, had tried to prepare himself for what it would look like when the Japanese committed their full strength. Nothing could have prepared him. The Zeros fell on them like wolves. They came from above, from the sides, from angles Harrigan hadn't even considered. They moved with a fluid grace that made the American planes look clumsy by comparison. Deadly, beautiful, terrifying. "Steady," Harrigan said into his radio. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Let them commit. Fletcher, hold your line. Martinez, maintain separation." "Roger, Skipper." "They're coming fast, sir." "I see them. Hold." The lead Zero selected Harrigan as its target. Good, that was the plan, be the bait. The Japanese pilot was aggressive, confident. He'd probably shot down a dozen American planes already, probably thought this would be easy. 3 fat Wildcats flying in a loose formation. Target practice, he dove steeper, building speed, his cannons would be loaded. His finger on the trigger, waiting for the range to close. 800 yards, 600. Harrigan flew straight and level, presenting a perfect broadside target. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to brake, to dive, to run. He thought about the matchsticks on his kitchen table. He thought about Anne telling him to trust the geometry. He thought about Devon Ashford in the ground and the promise he'd made. 400 yards, the Zero's nose lit up, muzzle flashes. The Japanese pilot was firing early, eager. Tracers streaked past Harrigan's canopy like angry fireflies, 200 yards. "Now!" Harrigan shouted. "Brake right hard!" Harrigan rolled the Wildcat right and pulled. The stick came back into his gut. G-forces crushed him down into his seat. Blood drained from his head. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. On the other side of the sky, Fletcher broke left. The 2 Wildcats turned toward each other, crossing, scissoring. The Zero, locked onto Harrigan, followed him into the turn. The Japanese pilot was good. He pulled hard, trying to keep his gun sight on target. His plane responded like a dancer, tight, precise, but the geometry was already in motion. As the Zero turned to follow Harrigan, it flew directly across Fletcher's nose. Perfect deflection shot. Fletcher didn't hesitate, didn't think. Just did exactly what Harrigan had drilled into him for 3 days straight. He squeezed the trigger. 4 .50 caliber machine guns opened fire. The heavy bullets walked across the Zero's fuselage in a line of destruction. No armor to stop them, no self-sealing tanks to contain the damage. The Zero's engine exploded. The entire front section of the aircraft disintegrated into a cloud of aluminum fragments and burning fuel. The pilot didn't even have time to scream. What had been a killing machine 3 seconds ago was now flaming wreckage tumbling toward the ocean. Fletcher's voice crackled over the radio, shaking, awed. "Skipper, I got him. I actually got him." "Good shooting, Fletch. Now find the next one." Harrigan leveled his wings and scanned the sky. Another Zero was diving on Martinez, fast, aggressive. Martinez called his own weave. His wingman wasn't there anymore, but Harrigan was. They crossed paths. The Zero flew into Harrigan's guns. This time, Harrigan was the shooter. He squeezed the trigger and watched his tracers tear into the enemy's wing root. The fabric ripped, the spar snapped, the entire wing folded back, and the Zero tumbled out of control. At 37 years old, after 8 years of flying, after being mocked as an instructor who'd never seen real combat, James Harrigan finally had his first aerial kill. But there was no time to feel anything about it, because 15 more Zeros were already diving. The next 20 minutes became a blur of violence and physics. Harrigan called the brakes. Again and again, his voice steady over the radio even as bullets punched holes in his wings and shattered his canopy glass. Fletcher, brake left, Martinez right, cross and reset. Again, now. The weave became a rhythm, a dance, bait and cross, bait and cross. Every time a Zero committed to an attack, it flew into the crossfire. Martinez got a kill. A clean burst that tore the wing off a Zero at 300 yards. Fletcher got another, then another. The Americans weren't just surviving, they were winning. The Japanese pilots began to realize something was wrong. They'd never seen anything like this. American planes that didn't run, that turned toward danger instead of away from it. That created killing zones out of thin air. They tried to adapt. Some Zeros tried to attack from below. Harrigan called a vertical weave, same geometry, different axis. Others tried coordinated attacks, 2 or 3 Zeros at once from different angles. Harrigan split his tiny formation, created multiple crossing points, turned the sky into a maze of intersecting fire. The Zeros kept dying. And then something remarkable happened. A particularly skilled Zero pilot, flying with the precision of a veteran ace, came at Harrigan from the perfect angle, high side pass at exactly 30 degrees, textbook Japanese tactics, the same attack pattern that had killed Devon Ashford, that had killed 17 of Harrigan's students, the kind of attack that should have been impossible to counter. But Harrigan didn't react like those pilots had. He didn't panic, didn't jink wildly, didn't waste energy on desperate evasion. He calculated. In the 2 seconds between seeing the Zero commit and feeling the first bullets hit his plane, Harrigan's mind worked through the problem like an equation. Dive angle, 30 degrees. Closure rate, 500 knots. Distance to firing position, 400 yards. Time until optimal break, 3 seconds. His brain processed aerial combat like a mathematical proof. Every variable accounted for, every outcome predicted. This was what 8 years of teaching combat theory looked like. This was what happened when you turned war into geometry. Harrigan waited. The Zero closed, 300 yards, 200. Harrigan's thumb hovered over the radio switch, 100 yards. Brake right, now! He pulled into the turn at the exact microsecond when the Zero was committed but not yet in position to fire. Fletcher crossed from the opposite side, but this time Harrigan didn't need Fletcher to take the shot. As the Zero followed Harrigan's turn, it presented its belly, its most vulnerable angle, and Harrigan, still in his turn, pulled lead, aimed not at where the Zero was but where it would be. Deflection shooting, the hardest shot in aerial combat, the kind that required instinct and experience and a feel for the physics of flight. Harrigan squeezed the trigger. His tracers arced through the sky in a perfect curve. The Zero flew directly into the stream. The bullets shredded the cockpit, killed the pilot instantly. The plane rolled inverted and fell. Martinez watched it happen from 1,000 feet away. His voice over the radio carried pure disbelief. "Skipper, how did you—" That was a deflection shot, the kind that takes 100 combat missions to learn. Harrigan's response was calm, matter of fact. "I've been teaching combat theory for 8 years, Captain. I know every attack pattern, every angle, every mistake." He paused. "I just never had a chance to prove it until now." Martinez understood then. The old instructor wasn't surviving through luck. He was dominating through knowledge. All those years of analyzing gun camera footage, of studying Japanese tactics, of teaching young pilots what to watch for, of running scenarios in his head while younger men slept. Harrigan had built a library of aerial combat in his mind, and now, in the crucible of actual battle, that library was worth more than youth or reflexes or natural talent. Experience wasn't a weakness, it was the deadliest weapon in the sky. The student had become the master, not despite his age. Because of it, but the toll was mounting. Harrigan's plane was a flying wreck. Bullet holes stitched across his wings, his hydraulics were leaking. One of his guns had jammed, his canopy was cracked, spiderwebbed with impact points. Fletcher was wounded, took a cannon shell fragment in the shoulder, blood soaked through his flight suit. His voice over the radio was tight with pain, but he stayed in formation. Martinez's engine was smoking, losing oil pressure. He had maybe 10 minutes before it seized completely, and the ammunition was running critically low. Harrigan checked his counter. 40 rounds left, less than 5 seconds of firing time. The zeros kept coming. But they were changing tactics now. The Japanese pilots had figured out that diving attacks led to death, so they tried something else. They tried to swarm 10 zeros at once from every direction, trying to overwhelm the formation through sheer numbers. Harrigan saw them coming. "All aircraft, tighten up. We're going to spin the weave." "Sir?" "Trust me. When I call the brake, everyone turns hard. We're going to create a wheel of fire." The zeros closed, from above, from below, from the sides, a killing box that should have been inescapable. "Now!" All 3 Wildcats turned hard in the same direction, not toward each other this time, but in a circle, a rotating formation that created a continuous field of fire. The zeros, committed to their attacks from multiple angles, flew into the spinning trap. Harrigan fired, Fletcher fired, Martinez fired. 3 zeros exploded simultaneously. The others broke off in confusion. They'd never seen anything like this. The Americans had turned defense into offense, had created a tactic that didn't exist in any manual, had improvised under fire using nothing but geometry and trust, and the Japanese didn't know how to counter it. Harrigan looked at his watch. 23 minutes of continuous combat. 23 minutes that should have lasted 30 seconds before they were all shot down. Then he heard it. A different engine sound, higher, distant. He risked a glance upward. Through the gaps in the swirling dogfight, he saw them. American dive bombers. SBD Dauntlesses. Dozens of them at 15,000 feet, right over the Japanese carriers, and the sky above the fleet was empty. Every zero was down here, fighting Harrigan. The dive bombers rolled into their attacks unopposed. Harrigan watched them fall. 60-degree dives, precision attacks, no fighters to harass them, no opposition at all. The bombs hit. First the Akagi. Massive explosion amidships. The flight deck buckled and flames erupted from the hangar below. Then Kaga. Direct hit. Secondary explosions rippled along her length. Soryu. Another hit. The carrier began to list. The pride of the Japanese fleet was burning. And Harrigan understood. The weave hadn't just been about survival. It had been about strategy. 3 Wildcats had occupied 50 zeros for 23 minutes, had dragged them out of position, had made them so fixated on killing the Americans that they'd forgotten their primary mission. Protecting the carriers, Harrigan had won, not by fighting better, by thinking deeper. "All aircraft," he said over the radio. His voice was hoarse, exhausted. "Disengage. Head for home." "Skipper, they're still on us," Fletcher said. "I know, but look down." Below them, the Japanese carriers were dying. The zeros could see it too. Their homes were burning. Their purpose was gone. Some of the Japanese pilots broke off, racing back toward the fleet in a desperate attempt to help. Others, enraged, pressed their attacks with suicidal fury. Harrigan dove for a cloud bank. Fletcher and Martinez followed. They disappeared into the white mist. Zeros fired blindly after them, but the Americans were gone. Inside the cloud, Harrigan checked his fuel. 7%, maybe 15 minutes of flight time. The Yorktown was 40 miles away. They weren't going to make it. Harrigan did the math in his head. Current fuel burn rate, distance to carrier, headwind component. The numbers didn't work, but numbers could be adjusted. "Listen to me," he said over the radio. "Lean out your mixture. Reduce RPM to 1800. We're going to glide as much as we fly." "Skipper, if we reduce power, we'll lose altitude." "Then we lose altitude, but we make it home." Harrigan pulled back the throttle. The engine note changed, quieter, more efficient. The Wildcat began to descend in a gentle glide. He became an instructor again, even in crisis. Even with his plane shot full of holes and fuel draining away and his best chance of survival measured in single-digit percentages, he taught. Feel the plane. Find the sweet spot where she wants to fly. Don't fight her. Let aerodynamics do the work. Small corrections, smooth inputs. Fletcher and Martinez matched his profile, 3 crippled Wildcats limping across the Pacific. Behind them, the sky was still full of Zeros, but the Japanese pilots had their own fuel problems, their own damaged aircraft, their own dying carriers to worry about. The pursuit fell away. Harrigan flew on. He talked to his wingmen, kept them focused, kept them calm. "Check your heading, watch your altitude, we've come this far, we're not dying in sight of home." His own plane was barely holding together. The engine sputtered, missed a beat, caught again. Warning lights flickered on his panel, fuel pressure dropping, oil temperature rising. He ignored them, just flew. 1 mile at a time, 1 minute at a time. Then Fletcher called out, "Skipper, I see them. 2 o'clock low." Harrigan looked. The American fleet. Yorktown was listing, damaged from bombs, smoking but still afloat. Enterprise steamed beside her, undamaged, flight deck clear. "Enterprise, this is Wildcat lead, 3 aircraft inbound, emergency fuel state, request priority landing." "Wildcat lead, Enterprise, you are cleared for immediate recovery. Deck is yours." Harrigan set up his approach. His fuel gauge read 0. The engine was running on fumes and prayers and the last drops of aviation gasoline clinging to the bottom of the tank. He extended his landing gear. 1 wheel came down, the other stuck. He cycled the handle, pumped the emergency hydraulic system. Nothing. He tried again. The second wheel dropped, locked, barely. Harrigan lined up on the carrier's wake. The deck rose and fell with the swells. A moving target, always moving. He cut the throttle. The engine quit. Dead silence except for the wind. Harrigan was gliding now. No power. 1 chance. The deck rushed up. He flared, touched down hard. The tail hook caught the number 3 wire. The Wildcat jerked to a halt. Harrigan sat in the cockpit, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. His vision was blurred. He was alive. They were all alive. The canopy was yanked open. A deck crewman looked in at him. Sir, can you move?" Harrigan unbuckled, tried to stand. His legs wouldn't work. The crewman helped him out onto the wing. Harrigan looked at his plane. Someone whistled. "Jesus Christ, Commander, how are you even alive?" The Wildcat looked like it had been through a shredder. They counted later. 47 bullet holes, shredded control surfaces, 1 aileron barely attached, hydraulic fluid dripping onto the deck. "Geometry," Harrigan said quietly. "Geometry doesn't miss." Fletcher landed next. His shoulder was soaked with blood, but he was grinning through the pain. Martinez came in last. His engine seized 30 seconds after he caught the wire. The propeller froze. Dead stick. If he'd been 10 seconds slower, he would have ditched in the ocean. The three pilots stood on the deck. They didn't say anything, just looked at each other. They'd done it. 3 Wildcats against 50 Zeros, 7 confirmed kills, 0 American losses, and they'd changed the course of the entire battle. The debriefing room was packed. Every officer on the Enterprise wanted to hear what had happened. Harrigan sat at a table with a cup of coffee he couldn't drink because his hands shook too much. An intelligence officer asked him questions. How many zeros? 50, maybe more. How long did you engage? 23 minutes continuous. How many kills? 7 confirmed, possibly more. How did you survive? Harrigan looked up at the officer. We used a tactical formation called the Weave. 2 or more aircraft flying line abreast create mutual support and overlapping fields of fire. When one plane is attacked, both planes turn toward each other. The attacking aircraft is forced to fly through the crossfire. The room was silent. It works, Harrigan said. It works against superior aircraft, superior pilots, superior numbers. It works because it's physics. And physics doesn't care about anything except the math. Admiral Ford pushed through the crowd. He looked older than he had 3 days ago. The battle had aged everyone, but he was smiling. Commander Harrigan, walk with me. They went out onto the deck. The sun was setting. The ocean was burning orange and gold. Behind them, the Yorktown was still burning too. She'd taken more damage after Harrigan landed. Torpedoes from a Japanese submarine, she was going down, but the Japanese had lost 3 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu. The 4th, Hiryu, would sink tomorrow. The balance of power in the Pacific had shifted, and 3 Wildcats had made it possible. I have new orders for you, Ford said. Sir? You're being pulled from combat operations. Harrigan felt something cold in his chest. Sir, I can still fly. I can... You misunderstand, Commander. This isn't a punishment. It's a promotion. Ford handed him a folder. Effective immediately, you are Chief Tactical Instructor for Pacific Fleet Fighter Operations. Your job is to teach every pilot in the Navy how to fly the Weave, to turn it from theory into doctrine. But, sir, I just proved I can fight. You proved something more important, Ford interrupted. You proved you can think, you can teach, you can take impossible odds and make them survivable. The Admiral put a hand on Harrigan's shoulder. James, you could go back to combat. Get yourself killed being a hero, or you can save hundreds of lives by teaching them what you know. Which one serves the greater good? Harrigan was quiet for a long time. He thought about the moment in the cockpit, the moment he'd finally squeezed the trigger and watched a Zero die. It had felt empty, not triumphant, not satisfying, just necessary. But later, when Fletcher had radioed, "You saved my life, Skipper," something had shifted inside him. That had felt right. Not because Harrigan was the hero, but because the math had worked, because geometry had protected a 22-year-old kid who deserved to go home. Sir, Harrigan said slowly, when I was in that cockpit, getting shot at, I realized something. What's that? I wasn't scared of dying. I was scared of being wrong. Scared that my theory would fail and good men would die because I'd been arrogant enough to think I was smarter than I actually was. Ford nodded. And when it worked? When it worked, I didn't feel proud. I felt relieved because it meant I could teach it, could pass it on, could make sure it outlived me. Harrigan looked at the Admiral. I don't want to be a fighter pilot, sir. I never did. I just wanted to solve the problem, and now that I have... He gestured at the folder. Teaching others to stay alive matters more than adding to my own kill count. Ford smiled. Now you understand what I've known all along.
You're not a warrior, James. You're a scholar.
And scholars change the world by sharing what they know. Yes, sir, I understand that now. Ford walked away. Harrigan stood on the deck and watched the sun go down. His war was over, but his mission was just beginning. The years after Midway blurred together in a cascade of training schools and briefing rooms and young faces eager to learn. Harrigan spent them teaching across the Pacific: Pensacola, San Diego, Pearl Harbor, Guadalcanal. Thousands of pilots, young men with fire in their eyes and dreams of glory. He taught them to forget glory, to embrace geometry instead. The weave became standard doctrine. Every fighter pilot learned it, practiced it, lived it. The kill ratios reversed. Zeros that had dominated the Pacific for 18 months suddenly found themselves outmatched, not because American planes got better, but because American tactics did. By late 1943, Japanese pilots were reporting in debriefs about the American scissors that made their Zeros vulnerable. They couldn't understand how slow, heavy Wildcats were killing their agile fighters. Harrigan kept meticulous records. 412 pilots confirmed that the weave had saved their lives in combat. 412 men who came home because an old instructor had spent a night moving matchsticks on a kitchen table. In 1943, the Navy introduced the F-6F Hellcat, a plane that was faster and more powerful than the Zero. The pilots still flew the weave because good tactics transcended technology. In 1944, Japanese kamikaze attacks began. Harrigan developed a new defensive formation, the Big Blue Blanket, fighter patrols that intercepted suicide planes 50 miles from the fleet, layered defense, overlapping coverage, the same geometric principles that made the weave work. It saved dozens of ships. Hundreds of sailors. Harrigan never flew combat again after Midway, but he fought every day nonetheless, with chalk and blackboards and patient explanations, with the certain knowledge that every pilot who learned the weave was a life saved, that every geometric principle he taught was a widow who wouldn't have to stand at a grave. 1967, Vice Admiral James Harrigan stood at the podium at the Naval Academy and looked out at the assembled officers. He was 62 years old now, retired after 40 years of service. His hair was white, his glasses thicker, his hands marked with age spots and old scars from that day over Midway. But his mind was still sharp. His voice still carried the quiet authority of a man who'd proven every word he ever spoke. Behind him on the wall was a photograph. 3 Wildcats in formation. June 4th, 1942. The day everything changed. "They called me old," Harrigan said to the crowd. "When I was 37, they called me Grandpa. They said I was too old to fight, too old to matter, just a teacher playing at tactics." He paused. "But I learned something. Experience isn't weakness. It's your deadliest weapon. Young men have speed, reflexes, courage, all important things." He gestured at the photograph. "But old men have something better. We have patience, we have perspective, we have the wisdom to solve problems instead of just reacting to them." In the front row, Captain Martinez sat listening. He was 49 now, still flying, still teaching younger pilots the lessons Harrigan had taught him 25 years ago. Youth thinks victory comes from being fastest, being strongest, being bravest. Harrigan smiled. Age knows that victory comes from being smartest, from turning the enemy's strength into his weakness, from fighting with your mind instead of just your hands. He looked out at the young faces in the audience, officers in their 20s and 30s who'd never known a world where the weave didn't exist. Some of you will become great pilots, great warriors, and that's fine. The Navy needs warriors. But some of you will become teachers, tacticians, the ones who think instead of just doing. And I want you to know something. He tapped the podium. Those of you who think, who calculate, who solve problems. You're not lesser because you're not the fastest guns. You're not inferior because you prefer matchsticks to medals. You're the ones who will save lives. You're the ones who will change wars. And you're the ones who will leave a legacy that matters. The room stood and applauded. Harrigan stepped down from the podium. Martinez met him at the bottom. The young hotshot who'd called him old man. The ace who'd learned humility from an instructor with 0 kills. Now they were just 2 men who'd survived when they shouldn't have. "Thank you, sir," Martinez said, "for teaching me to think. Thank you for being willing to learn." They shook hands. 2 men separated by decades, but united by geometry. 1978. Harrigan walked slowly through the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola. He was 73 now. Used a cane. His wife Anne walked beside him. Older too, grey-haired, still beautiful. Still the woman who'd sat with him at that kitchen table and told him to trust the geometry. They stopped in front of a display case. Inside were wooden matchsticks, arranged in a weave pattern. The plaque read, "The matchsticks that changed aerial warfare, used by Vice Admiral James Harrigan to develop the Harrigan Weave Tactical Formation, credited with saving over 400 American pilots in World War II and remaining in use today." A young man in a flight suit stood nearby, maybe 25, fresh-faced, eager. He noticed Harrigan staring at the case. "Excuse me, sir, are you Admiral Harrigan?" Harrigan turned slowly. "I used to be." The young pilot's eyes went wide. "Sir, I just finished flight school. They taught us your weave. It's still part of the core curriculum. We practice it in F-14S now." "Is it now?" "Yes, sir. My grandfather flew Hellcats in the Pacific. He said the weave saved his life in 1944, over the Philippines." The young man stuck out his hand. "I wouldn't be here if you hadn't figured it out. My grandfather, my father, me." "We owe you everything." Harrigan shook his hand. "You don't owe me anything, son. I just did the math." "It was more than math, sir." "No, it really was just math. Simple geometry, simple physics. Anyone could have figured it out." "But you're the one who did." Harrigan looked back at the matchsticks. Arranged on that table 36 years ago, the foundation of everything that came after. "I suppose I am." After the young pilot left, Anne took Harrigan's arm. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Not being famous, not being the ace with the most kills?" Harrigan thought about it, about the 400 pilots who'd lived because of what he'd taught them, about the thousands he'd trained who'd gone on to train others, about the young man whose grandfather had survived the Philippines, about Fletcher and Martinez and all the others who'd trusted the geometry when every instinct said to run. "I didn't need to be famous," he said. "I needed to be right." He looked at his wife, the woman who'd believed in matchsticks when everyone else saw madness. "And I was right. The geometry proved it." Anne smiled and squeezed his arm. They walked out into the Florida sunshine together. Behind them, the matchsticks remained in their case, arranged in the pattern that had changed everything. A testament to the power of thinking, of refusing to accept defeat, of turning physics into salvation. June 4th, 1981. James Harrigan died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76. 39 years to the day after the Battle of Midway, he was buried at the Naval Academy Cemetery in Annapolis with full military honors. 4 F-14 Tomcats flew overhead in missing man formation. One peeled off. The others continued in a weave pattern. Even in death, his legacy flew. The cemetery was crowded. Hundreds came to pay their respects. Anne Harrigan stood at the graveside. She was 76. The same age James had been. They'd grown old together. 54 years of marriage, 54 years of loving a man who couldn't rest while others were dying, who'd stayed up late with matchsticks when he should have been sleeping, who'd chosen to teach instead of to fight. She held the folded flag against her chest, just like Margaret Ashford had done 39 years ago. But this flag was different. This flag was for a man who'd kept his promise, who'd found a way so the next widow wouldn't have to stand at a grave. Anne didn't cry. She'd cried enough over the years, all those nights wondering if he'd come home from the next training flight, all those mornings sending him off to teach young pilots how to survive. She'd known what she was marrying, a teacher, a thinker, a man who believed problems had solutions if you were willing to work hard enough to find them, and she'd loved him for it. Fletcher approached her, 61 years old now, grey-haired, still carrying a scar on his shoulder from a cannon shell fragment in 1942, still alive because a 37-year-old instructor had believed in geometry. "Mrs. Harrigan, I'm so sorry." Anne looked at the man who'd been a terrified 22-year-old boy when her husband had asked him to trust the weave. "Don't be sorry, Fletcher. He saved your life. You lived. You had a family. Grandchildren." She touched Fletcher's arm. That's what he wanted. That's all he ever wanted. Martinez joined them, 63 years old, leaning on a cane, tears streaming down his weathered face, the hotshot ace who'd called Harrigan an old man, who'd learned that wisdom beats speed. "I called him old man," Martinez said quietly. "I mocked him, and he saved us all anyway." Anne smiled, just a little. He never held grudges, he just solved problems. She looked at the coffin, at the man who'd spent his life teaching death to dance. And he solved the biggest problem of all. He taught boys to come home. More pilots came forward, men in their 60s and 70s now, men who'd flown the weave over Guadalcanal and Saipan and Iwo Jima, men who'd taught it to others who'd flown it over Korea and beyond. Each one stopped to pay respects to the woman whose husband had saved them, to the woman who'd believed in matchsticks. The headstone was simple: Vice Admiral James Ghost Harrigan, 1905 to 1981, the man who taught death to dance. But carved below that was something else, something Harrigan had requested years before, a simple equation: 2 planes, 1 enemy, geometry, the mathematics of survival, the legacy of matchsticks. The weave outlived its creator by decades. It's still taught today. Fighter pilots in jets that fly faster than sound still learn the basic principle. Mutual support, overlapping fields of fire, turn into the attack. The technology changes, the aircraft evolve, but the physics remains, and somewhere in every aviation museum, in every tactical manual, in every briefing room where young pilots learn to fight, there's a reference to the instructor who proved that wisdom beats youth, that thinking beats speed, that geometry beats courage, that 3 matchsticks arranged on a kitchen table can change the course of history if you're willing to trust the math, if you're willing to fly into death without flinching, if you're willing to be right instead of famous. James Harrigan was all those things. He took a problem that had killed hundreds, solved it with matchsticks and patience, proved it with his life, and taught it to thousands who passed it on to thousands more. The sky remembers. The pilots remember, and every time a formation of fighters executes a weave, turning toward danger instead of away from it, they echo the lesson of that morning over Midway, when 3 old Wildcats taught the world that sometimes the craziest idea in the room is the only one that can save you, that sometimes the old man everyone dismisses is actually the smartest person there, that sometimes victory doesn't go to the swift, sometimes it goes to the weaver.